shortly. Again, today the webinar will be facilitated by Lauren Davies. He is a CRSP and a guy that knows a lot about health and safety, so he's an awesome guy to listen to. Today the discussion is going to be on workplace inspections, and without further ado, let's throw it over to Lauren. Thank you, Lauren.
Thanks a lot, William. Today is element D, workplace inspections. And this is one of the more important elements that we're going to discuss in this webinar series because it's a cornerstone of everyone's safety program. The previous elements that we've covered, such as hazard identification, will help you with your workplace inspections. These industry-specific categories will be tailored as a result of this workplace inspection program. So let's get started. We're going to cover the regulatory requirements, understand the process of carrying out the workplace inspections, and lastly, identify and understand the relevancy to the OSSE audit requirements. We're going to get started today with Lesson 1, the regulatory requirements, and this builds the legal framework for workplace inspections, including the responsibilities for owners and managers, supervisors, and workers. And everyone needs to understand that everyone has a role to play in the inspection program. So the first question is, what is an inspection? And all an inspection is the process of examining the workplace, including the environment, equipment, vehicles, processes, and practices. The second question is, why is a workplace inspection program required? And the first answer is the regulatory requirements. Under the regulations, it's imperative to identify and correct hazardous situations before an unplanned event takes place, and be able to minimize the risk of worker injury or illness and reduce property damage. So where do we find these? Well, the first section is under the Workmen's Compensation Act, Part 3, Division 4, under the Joint Health and Safety Committee regulation. Section 130H and I tells you about when the Joint Health and Safety Committee is to ensure inspections are carried out and when the members are required to participate in inspections. In Part 3, Division 11, it covers the requirements around inspections by WorkSafe BC at your worksite. Under the Occupational Health and Safety regulations, we have several sections that include workplace inspections. Part 3 is rights and responsibilities. Part 4, general conditions. Part 8 is personal protective clothing and equipment, and it documents the inspections that need to happen on that type of equipment. Part 9 is confined spaces. Part 11, fall protection, requires inspection of all fall protection equipment prior to use. Part 12, tools, machinery, and equipment, basically nails down when you have to use pre-use inspections on equipment. Part 13, ladders, scaffolds, and temporary work platforms have an inspection component. Part 14, cranes and hoists have to be inspected daily and also have an annual inspection requirement. Mobile equipment such as forklifts requires a multiple of inspections, including a pre-use inspection every shift. Part 19, electrical safety inspections, and Part 20 covers construction, excavation, and demolition inspections. That's a mouthful. If you have any questions on the specifics of those particular regulations, consult your WorkSafe BC website, and that will give you a more detailed coverage than we're going to cover today. So, for Lesson 1, for review, I need you to understand that workplace inspections are a legal requirement. They're not an option. Failing to do workplace inspections will put you out of compliance. Secondly, I'd like you to understand that the inspection process is very valuable, and it'll correlate with the success of your safety program. So if you're committed to having a safe workplace, one of the key areas to work on is having an effective workplace inspection program. So let's get started with that. Before we do, does everyone understand where to find the regulations on the workplace inspection? And I'll just give you a minute to answer that polling question. Great. Well, everyone understands where to find it, so that's a good start. So let's move on. This is where the rubber meets the road, carrying out inspections. We need to fully understand the process of carrying out workplace inspections so that we have a good workplace inspection program. We need to understand that workplace inspections are a key element of your safety program. They can confirm or deny that industry-specific programs are functioning as designed before serious injuries or losses occur. And lastly, it contributes to the check portion of the Plan, Do, Check, Act continuous improvement cycle that you see to the left. Again, people understand that we need to have a continuous improvement process. Workplace inspections contribute by checking to make sure that your actions that you've put in place are actually being followed and that they're effective. So let's touch on the types of inspections. First on the list is informal. These are done on a daily basis, and this can include documentation from hazard reports or supervisor journals, for instance. These are generally walkthroughs through the plant. Pre-start or pre-use inspections are a requirement and is prior to daily use of certain equipment, such as forklifts or cranes. Equipment-specific machinery can also require pre-use inspections to make sure that they're safe to operate before starting. Special inspections occur when new equipment or processes are introduced, or as a part of an investigation or an unplanned event, such as a truck going off the road. When it's pulled back on the road, someone needs to inspect it to ensure that it's safe to operate. Lastly, we have a formal inspection. These are planned inspections covering a prescribed area carried out on a regular scheduled basis. It looks for both unsafe conditions and unsafe actions. Let's take a look at the steps to doing an inspection. First, we need to plan the inspection. When should it take place? What's a good time of day? Doing an inspection at lunch might sound easy, but you're not going to see any unsafe actions. So you want to make sure that it's planned during a busy time of day so you can see as much of the process as possible. How to conduct the inspection? Completing the report to make sure that you've completed the requirements for documentation, and then monitoring the corrective action to make sure that your recommendations are followed through. Let's start with planning the inspection. Who will conduct the inspection? Who else will be involved? What is to be inspected? Remember that if you're doing an inspection in an area that you're not familiar, a lot of the times you'll be taking along a person that is familiar with that area, and you need to make special arrangements to have that person freed up. Again, when will the inspection be conducted? Hopefully through a busy time of day so you can see as many behaviors and operations as possible. You also have to realize what tools and materials will be needed. Do you need to have a camera? Do you need to have a clipboard? Or are you going to take your phone instead to use it as a camera? Can you use some of the latest software on your iPad to record your inspection? Lastly, before you go into any area, you need to be familiar with the personal protective equipment that is required by your policy. So sometimes you might have to refer to your policy to ensure that you are wearing the proper protective equipment for that area. So with informal inspections, these are regular walkthrough of the facilities conducted by management or supervision to identify issues in the process, developing hazards, and unsafe acts. And at all of your operations, people do this every day. It can happen multiple times a shift by different supervisors. One of the key things that people miss, however, is it's critical that supervisors are trained to spot the variances in procedure, conditions, and behaviors. If your supervisor is not familiar with your confined space program, he will not identify which issues are missing. He will not notice that there is no gas detector present, and he will not notice that the workers are not wearing the required rescue equipment. So again, we need to make sure that the supervisors are properly trained to look for the issues that we need for each of those industry-specific programs and the normal operations. One other thing I'll mention is if the supervisor gets in the habit of inspecting the worksite and employees, he will notice when any employee is not functioning properly or out of character with his normal behavior. So if someone is not feeling well or they're under the influence, he will pick it up. Pre-start or pre-use inspections need to be conducted prior to use of many pieces of mobile equipment and things like cranes. One of the issues that we see on a regular basis is that people do inspections, but they either don't document them or they document them poorly. They don't include all the required components of date, time, operator's name, the conditions that have been checked, and any deficiencies identified. One of the ways that we've identified of helping small employers deal with this is by showing them duplicate books. These are books that have your pre-use inspection printed on them, and they have duplicate copies. So when the worker completes one copy, there is a record that stays in the book. The one copy that he's completed can be torn out of the book and handed to a supervisor as a proof of his inspection, and a copy of the record stays in the book with the forklift or other piece of mobile equipment, so that everyone can confirm that it has been done and the corrective actions can take place as soon as possible. Special inspections. Whenever an unplanned event occurs, such as a lifting device breaking, a machine stuck in the mud, or a collision or fire takes place, we need to inspect that equipment to ensure it's safe to operate by a qualified person. Again, remember, if there's a crane lift taking place on your property and an unexpected event takes place, like a sling breaks, the crane can be damaged by the rapid unloading of that load on a heavy mobile crane. So again, someone has to do a detailed inspection to make sure that there's nothing damaged before he goes to reattach that load. Same with a forklift stuck in the mud. When someone pulls it out, is any damage done? Is there any hoses that are ripped off, fittings that are damaged, or for instance, forks that are bent? All those could contribute to an unsafe act later. Same with fire. A lot of times electrical currents or circuits are damaged, and some of those are protective equipment such as fire equipment that will not operate as a result of that previous fire. The normal inspection that you all are concerned about is what we consider to be a formal inspection. These identify safe acts and conditions that would lead to an injury or loss. And they are a consistent inspection of areas and procedures that allow for tracking and trending of your issues and progress. For best results, it's recommended that you use a checklist, and it should be tailored to individual sites to provide the best value. Remember that whatever you track gets improved. So if you're having issues with a particular component of your safety program, don't be afraid to put it on your list, because when people start looking for it, people will understand that it's being watched and the behaviors will automatically improve. When you're doing your formal inspections, try to use a team approach with at least a supervisor and a worker. Make sure that before you start your inspection that you have your checklist, camera, clipboard, and pen available, that you have the necessary PPE to be in the proper area, and try to complete the documentation as you go. It's difficult to remember the right locations for certain components when you've identified them later. This is a copy of a formal inspection form, and we will be loading these on the Learning Center website for you guys to copy after this webinar is completed. This is just a formal inspection. It basically just has the basic requirements of what area is being done, the date, the people inspecting, who's from management, who's from the hourly, what are the areas of inspection, and the items that are noted on your list. It doesn't have to be complex, but again, the better your inspection, the better your performance is going to be. Just so that you guys are aware, I've included a claim count from WorkSafe BC for injuries in the manufacturing sector for the last 5 years. I'd like you to notice that overexertion amounts to 29% of the claims that have been filed in the last 5 years. Next highest is struck by, which is 19%. fall on the same level is 9%, struck against is 8%, and fall from elevation is 7%. It's critical for you to be aware of these things as you're walking through doing your workplace inspections, so you can see how your workplace is exposed to these hazards. Remember when you're conducting your inspection to use the checklist, but don't be afraid to watch for other objects that are not listed. Again, don't use the checklist as a blinder so that you don't see anything else that's happening. Look for and note potential hazards that are both on your report or floor plan to make sure that maybe they need to be added to your inspection. Don't be afraid to observe and talk with workers and supervisors about the issues that they have in their areas. Most often, the people, like the workers or supervisors, have intimate knowledge of problems in those particular areas. If you see something that's a high risk, try to correct it immediately. Sometimes this can be done simply by putting up danger tape around an area that requires additional guarding, or possibly cleaning up some oil that's on the floor so someone does not slip on it. Remember to consider when to conduct your inspections to get the best value. For example, day shift, night shift, peaks of operation, and any impact that it might have on operation. Remember to complete the report. A lot of times inspections are left half done because of a delay, or someone just doesn't get around to filling out the paperwork. Make sure that you've included the date and time of inspection, identify the department area inspected, clearly specify the identified hazards and recommendations. Try to reference the applicable legislation or standard if it's possible for you. Identify the person responsible and the completion date for it to be repaired or remediated, and identify any temporary control put in place to reduce the hazard. This following form is another one that we've printed out for you, and it just allows you to identify the hazards and rate them accordingly so you can prioritize which ones need to be worked on first. And again, we will put this on the website for you. The next most common issue that we have with workplace inspections is that the committees go around and identify hazards, but the hazards and corrective actions are never followed up on. So as a result, the program is not very effective. Remember that corrective action must be appropriate, effective, and timely, and identify applicable regulations or standards to make it more viable to get it done completely and quickly. Follow up with the responsible person for those areas and identify any progress of an issue and the resolution. Again, this is just part of your committee responsibilities for communicating what's being done about the issues that have been brought forward. On this page is a corrective action log. Again, this is just a simple Excel sheet that's been documented. There is a copy on the website after the webinar. And all this corrective action log does is it shows you what hazards have been identified, what is the risk involved with them, and they've been rated. So we can see that we've got 4 B hazards there, 1 A hazard, and 1 C hazard. The dates they've been completed, the source, whether it comes from a safety tour, a hazard report, an incident investigation, or just a person that's brought it forward, and who's responsible to fix it. By having a simple corrective action log like this, you can post this on your bulletin board and your workers can understand where their hazards that they've identified are, both how they've been rated and when they've been completed. This is just a simple hazard reporting form. Again, this is just a simple form that any worker can take and fill out, pass on to their supervisor to have a hazard rectified. An important part of this form is having a portion for follow-up, saying that the completed action has been reviewed with the person that brought it forward on a particular date, just to close the loop with the workers so they can understand that by bringing hazards forward, they will be addressed and they will receive some notification that they've been completed. One of the things that's a little bit ticklish that a lot of people avoid on workplace inspections are unsafe acts. as no one likes to correct someone's behavior. Unfortunately, it's something that people need to understand is not quite right. And the picture on your right shows someone shooting sparks onto an oxyacetylene unit. If one of those regulators is leaking, this worker could instigate an ignition that he might not be happy with. I'm going to show you a few more of the humorous ones, just to see if these don't happen in your workplace. So, this is an example of overexertion, the one that we talked about in the manufacturing industry. The good news is that this doesn't happen much in Canada in this particular picture, but unfortunately it happens every day in our workplaces with people lifting boxes that are too heavy for them or too awkward. The next one is a respiratory issue. We can see that this is probably a third world country, but in our country, people that have respirators fail to wear them. Again, people can be very creative about getting the job done. In this situation here, it's going to lead to a possible workplace fall. Again, in this case here, we have a worker that's identified he needs a face shield, and he's improvised. Again, in our situation, a lot of times face shields are available, but they're failed to being used. In this case here, we have luggage handlers being exceptionally creative. Unfortunately, the couples on each side of the stack are not identifying that that's a hazard that could fall over and possibly cause them injury. Sometimes people can be very creative in getting the job done. In this case here, we have possibly 3 to 4 people that could be at risk of a fall. You'd swear this comes right out of a movie, but it doesn't. And again, it looks like the Three Stooges, but I hate to see what happens when the lunch bell rings. Again, this is air conditioner being installed, and this is not necessarily the best way to do it. Again, this particular construction worker has identified that there's a possible fall protection, not a fall, a dropping object issue on his work site. And he's taken remedial action, but I'm not sure how effective it's going to be. I'm hoping that you're not the expert in biological weapons, as everyone else has their hazmat suit on. So I hope there's no hazard there. If there is, this person is going to be in trouble. Again, someone missed the boat here with the hazard assessment for carrying bombs around the plant. I'm happy to say that the bomb is not armed, but the person in the forklift, I'm not sure about him. If you have a mechanic in the yard, this is not the way to support a vehicle. And if you have an electrician on staff, working in a swimming pool with an aluminum ladder with an extension cord is not a good idea. I'm hoping that this never occurs at your work site with forklifts. In this situation here, we have in the neighborhood of 4 to 5 people that could be seriously injured if one fork breaks. Unfortunately, we think that this one is funny, but this occurs way more often than we'd like, and people fail to realize that the hydraulics on power equipment are usually gravity down if a hose breaks. In this case here, if you're in an airplane and your engine stops, I guess you have limited chances, but I think I would take my chances with gliding down versus crawling out to work on the motor. This is one of the most elaborate systems of getting to a light that I've ever seen, and I hope that the guy is a good lumber grader, because if any of those pieces of lumber are not sufficiently strong, that's going to be a bad day. And lastly on my list is, if you are doing this, you should probably check out the regulations around unsafe work. So why do we do workplace inspections? Is to make sure that the safety rules in your in your WorkSafe actually are followed. So now these are some pictures that have just been taken to help with this presentation, and I'm hoping this is not your work site, but obviously if this is what you see on a workplace inspection, we need to make sure that this is properly documented so it gets corrected. This might not seem like a problem in this particular plant, but if you picture yourself having to come through this room in the dark because of a power outage, having this debris and problems on the floor is going to be a real hazard. Electrical safety is something that I see on every inspection that I do, whether it's frayed electrical cords or broken plugs or wires that are bare or plugs or covers that are damaged. So again, ensure that you're keeping it in mind when you're doing your workplace inspections. The next one that's violated quite often is chemical safety. In this case, we have a grinder set up in front of chemical storage that's quite flammable. So is it a good idea to put hot sparks on flammable equipment? My guess is that it's not. This is an opportunity for your workplace inspection to have this corrected. One other thing you can keep an eye open for is environmental safety. In this case here, we have a leak in the roof that's being shown on the suspended ceiling. At this point, there's not much of a hazard, but if you identify it at this stage, the tiles can be changed, the roof can be fixed before serious damage takes place. If it continues to be undealt with, you will end up with this tile falling out of the roof and possibly others, as well as water on the floor and multiple other issues with electrical equipment, etc., that could have been prevented. So just a little bit of a review. An effective workplace inspection is a critical portion of your safety program. Tracking and trending of your inspection data provides information for continuous improvement in safety and productivity. And one of the questions people will say, well, where did productivity come into this? When you are doing effective workplace inspections, you will find all sorts of issues that actually hinder your productive process. So as a result, removing those issues will lead to a more productive environment. So our next polling question, does everyone understand the concepts of doing a workplace inspection? And I'll just give you a minute to respond. Good. Then we can move on. Our next lesson is the OSSE requirements. The following items will demonstrate your compliance with the regulations and diligence in doing your inspections. There are several requirements in the OSSE audit that have a requirement for inspections. First, there needs to be a policy on having a formal inspection process that documents who is going to do inspections and what the frequencies are. Next, your auditor is going to look for forms. Are the safety inspections documented? Are they completed, and are they reviewed and signed off by upper management? Next, he's going to take a look at your hazards that you've identified. Are they prioritized? Is there a system to evaluate them based on risk? And if you follow the forms that we have on the site, you will see that they will meet this requirement. Next is the corrective actions. Corrective actions need to be implemented for identified hazards, and deficiencies need to be corrected in an appropriate time frame. If you follow the corrective action log, you will document the time required from the time a hazard is identified to the time the hazard is rectified. And from that, you can judge how effective your safety program is. Report analysis. From your inspection reports, you can trend them and say, where are my issues happening? And as a result, make changes to improve your production process. Lastly is communication. Are workers involved in the inspections? Are they mentioned on your joint occupational health and safety committee minutes for your meetings? Are they communicated to your workers via bulletin boards and crew talks? Training. Are individuals designated to conduct inspections? Have they been given appropriate training? Do they understand what hazards to look for? Hazard reporting. Is there a system to allow workers to report hazards, actions, and conditions immediately, such as the form that I showed you earlier? Is action taken by management in a timely manner when these are brought forward? Again, these are listed on your corrective action log as a hazard report, and they are followed up if you follow that system. A little bit of a review. Remember that effective workplace inspections are a critical portion of your safety program. Your auditor is looking for documentation that proves that your workplace is being inspected regularly and consistently. Understand that when he does his walkthrough inspection of your facility, he will be looking for these obvious issues that I showed you in pictures. If he sees those, he will be making a judgment on the effectiveness of your inspection program. Normally, if you do good inspections, you will also identify maintenance and production issues at the same time. So, things that we've covered, the regulatory requirements, how to do an inspection, and how OSSE ties in with your inspections are the topics that we covered today. Do we have any questions? Hello, William.
Yes, Lauren. Sorry, just finding my mic button there. We do have a couple questions, actually. So the first question that we have is, do all areas require inspection on the same schedule?
Well, that's a good question. Technically, the areas that must be inspected on a frequency that prevents unsafe conditions from developing. However, for my clients, I recommend that they inspect all of their areas monthly to get started until they can get their program up and running and get some consistency happening. Once that is in place, then you can evaluate the areas that you're inspecting and move the frequency up and down accordingly depending on their risk level. For instance, an office area might require inspection quarterly, where a hazardous production area might require inspections every 2 weeks. Remember, however, that every area, regardless of risk, must be inspected at a minimum annually. So even if you have a storage area in the backyard that no one goes into, someone has to check it at least annually in order to meet the regulations.
Thank you, Lauren. Another question that I have here. Why do we need to involve workers as well as management in a formal inspection process?
Okay, well, this is a good question, and I actually get this quite a bit. And you need to understand that, first, involving hourly workers makes use of their intimate knowledge of the process in the area. No one knows the area better than the person that works in it 8 or 10 hours a day. So you want to make sure that you can take advantage of that worker's knowledge in your inspection. Secondly, if there is a situation that needs immediate action, the management person has the authority to stop the process or unsafe behavior immediately, whereas an hourly person does not.
Excellent. Just a couple more questions. What are we supposed to do when we have the same item that keeps getting written down during a workplace inspection each month?
This is where the corrective action log actually is a very good tool. So what happens is you can document the inspections, document the hazards, and if they fail to be corrected in a period of multiple months, then the safety committee can be brought in and actually write a recommendation to management to resolve that issue. By following that process, the documentation is complete and management has no excuse for not solving those issues. Saying that, if you are using the corrective action log, I would suspect that management understands that they have clearly documented that they are not following the process and will fix those issues in a more timely manner. The key part is a lot of companies do not use the corrective action log, so items just continually get swept under the rug. As soon as you document that they haven't been done for 6 months, that puts management in a very ticklish situation when WorkSafe comes along.
Excellent. One last question. Do all people completing the workplace inspections require formal training in workplace inspections?
There's no requirement for all people to be formally trained in workplace inspection. However, it's good to have at least one person running the inspection to ensure that the proper areas are covered and that they know what to look for. It's very acceptable to bring additional people on a workplace inspection that are intimately familiar with a particular area or piece of equipment to ensure that all the hazards are identified. So it's a good practice to bring people that are not familiar with the inspection process along for the tour, but it's always a good idea to have at least one or two people that are trained in workplace inspection to identify other possible hazards.
Awesome, Lauren. Thank you for those answers. That does conclude the questions that I had received during the webinar today.
Okay, well, thank you very much. If someone comes up with a question after we're finished today, again, don't be afraid to send us an email and we'll try to follow up with you personally. Have yourself a great day and thanks for attending.